Welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nickel. Q&A episode today. So threw up a post on Instagram earlier in the week, and everybody hit me up with some questions. Got a ton and got some really good ones, so it should be a good episode. Listen, we're going to keep the shameless plug for Mindful Reviews pretty short this week. The Stone Glacier Terminus and Seek Outside Goshawk raffle is just about wrapped up. I'm going to be announcing the winner on Wednesday. This podcast will probably be going live Saturday. It's Saturday morning right now, Saturday the 19th of November. It's 5:30 a.m. Bit of a brisk early wake up this morning. It's the only time I had to do this podcast, so you got to do what you got to do. So I think there's maybe 3 or 4 tickets left, and as soon as that's done, it's done. The Mindful Reviews community is going phenomenally well. 60 paying members. Everybody seems to be super excited. We launched the selection voting for spotting scopes and power packs, because I'm going to start 2 reviews at the same time, because now that I'm trying to be a little bit more professional with the Mindful Reviews content, I want to make sure that everybody who's part of the community is getting their money's worth, and there's lots of reviews coming out on a regular basis. And some of these reviews, they take time, but it's not like you couldn't be doing other reviews at the same time. So had a lot of really good feedback about the type of spotters everybody wanted to see. And one of the conclusions it led me to is that there's no way I was going to be able to do what everyone wanted in one review. So what I've actually decided is I'm going to approach it as 3 different reviews. The first review, we're going to do kind of the alpha and beta glass in the 85 millimeter category. So this is going to be kind of like, if you had lots of money and could get whatever you want and wanted a big glass, what would you do? And the reason I want to do this one first is that I want to set the standard, because this should be the best optical experience. Yes, you could run a BTX with a 105 or a 115 or whatever that crazy thing from Saguaro is. But I mean, realistically, 99% of us owning an 85 or a 95 is like the biggest thing we're ever going to do. And after owning a 95 mil for the past 2 years, I actually think I'd prefer an 85. I don't think you sacrifice that much optical clarity and light gathering ability. And I think I'm a backcountry guy, and just shaving that extra pound or so and having a form factor that's a little bit smaller for the backpack, like that 95 is a bitch. It really is. And so that's why I've kept it to 85, because I think it's a more realistic option for most people. Also, some brands don't have anything in the 95 category. Like Kowa, I think the biggest it goes up to is 88, for example. Vortex and Maven, the biggest they go up to is 80 and 85. So we're going to keep it to 85 millimeter spotting scopes. I think I'm going to do 5. Right now, it looks like Saguaro, either Leica or Zeiss, Kowa, Maven, and Vortex. So 5 total. And then the next review I'm going to do will be a similar brand lineup, maybe a couple switch ups, but we're going to do everything in the 65 millimeter category. So we'll do kind of the best of, and then we'll do the best of backpacking option. And then the third review I'm going to do is going to be, we'll call it like the odds and ends. There's like the Athlons and the Meoptas and some brands that really present a unique kind of value proposition. Some of them might be a little harder to get. You might be a little leery of some of the warranties because, you know, they don't have the North American footprint that the larger brands do. So there's reasons why you might not want to get into that space. However, I think if there is going to be any like real nuggets or diamonds in the rough, it's going to be found in that kind of outlier category. So category 1, alpha and beta glass in the 85 mil category. And when I say 85 mil, there's some leeway there. Like the Maven's only 80. I'm trying to decide right now if we do the Kowa 77 or the Kowa 88. We'll see. I'm leaning towards the 77 just because it's such a popular scope with some people. And I think the 77 is a better fit for the 85 millimeter category. than it is for the 65 millimeter category. So we're going to go alpha beta glass, 85 mil, alpha beta glass, 65 mil, and then outlier glass. And we might even do a range of bigger and smaller glass. And what I can really do is just talk about kind of the best value to be had in that third category. And the goal would be to have all of those 3 reviews done in the next 6 months. I think it'll take me about 2 months per review. And I'm going to reach out to a couple brands to get some, not the brands themselves for the most part, but I'm actually thinking some like retailers and saying, you know, if you wanted to lend me some glass, I could put the name of your store in the review. Simply because buying that much glass is just too expensive. I'm not going to put out, 30 grand in spotting scopes. And spotting scopes are one of those things that as long as you're not a moron, you can use them and they don't degrade in value because there's no like mechanical wear and tear. So I think that's how I'm going to try and get that taken care of. So that's what's going on in Mindful Reviews. If you want to know anything else, mindful-reviews.com. I'm trying to think of what else is going on. I haven't really touched on the bodybuilding as of late. I'm just grinding away in my off season. Currently weigh 245. I'm actually starting work with a new coach tomorrow. I got to send in my first round of pictures. A bit of an interesting learning there. I find the discipline or the commitment device of having to send in pictures every week to a coach extremely helpful. I like it. It tends to keep me honest and keep me a little more focused. And so it sounds weird, but I don't think I need the technical advice of a coach, but being willing to give somebody $250 a month to look at my pictures every week and give me feedback and change my diet, I find I get a performance increase simply because there's that external factor that I don't know if it's like I'm looking for validation or what it is, but it helps. So even though I've been going with no coach and I think I've been doing just fine, I am going to start working with a new guy. Also, I think this bodybuilding contest is probably my last contest. I'm just too old for this stuff and I need to just, go back to being 215 pounds so I can hike better and all that kind of stuff. And if it is going to be my last contest, I really want to knock it out of the park. And so while I'm sure I could muddle through it on my own and it would be a great learning experience, I also don't have another 10 years to do this. So I want to be the best that I can. So starting work with a new coach Sunday, got to send in fasted check-in pics Sunday morning. Basically with where I'm at, there's maybe another month and a half left of my off season. And then the goal is to compete in early June. I got to go to Europe in July for a wedding with my wife, and that's when the contest I was going to do was scheduled for. So I'm going to move that up a little bit, which will help for sheep hunting because it'll give me a full 2 months to work on sheep cardio after the bodybuilding contest. So probably start prep sometime early February. Also, preparing for the goat hunt. I believe I'm going to go for 7 to 10 days sometime in the first 2 weeks of January. If anybody has a snowmobile with trailer that they want to lend or rent me, happy to pay a reasonable price for it. Renting some of these things from an actual rental facility, they normally charge like a flat day rate. And here's the bottom line. I'm going to be riding it in, and then it's going to sit in the woods for a week, and then I'm going to be riding it out. So flipping somebody personally like, hey, here's $500. Lend me your sled for 10 days. I'm only going to be riding it for 2, but give it to me for 10 is reasonable. Paying $250 to a rental agency for every single day, you end up paying, after taxes and maintenance fees, like $3,000, which is pretty cost prohibitive. So I'm hoping I can figure out some kind of informal arrangement with somebody. So if you've got a sled and you want to lend or rent it to me for a bit, I rode sleds for years, being an engineer, working up in the interior. I'm not a moron. I'm not going to break your machine. I'm pretty conservative as far as sleds go. I don't trash machines or do big crazy stuff. It was always like for work purposes. So we always had kind of older sleds and we would just putt along and get where we needed to go and get stuck as little as humanly possible. So with that being said, there will be an uptick in the goat related content coming online. So start thinking the things that you're curious about. And if there's any winter specific gear that you'd like to see tested or talked about, let me know, because now's the opportunity to kind of get all that stuff in. All right, let's dive into the questions. So Chandro asks, what came of the tent warranty? So I'm gonna provide a little more context about this first, just about reviews in general. So I'm sitting on like 5 or 6 kind of shorter reviews. I've got a tripod comparison between the Sea-Ray and what's the other one everybody runs? The Slick that I'm trying to get out. I got a Bino Pack comparison that I got to get out between the Alaskan Guide Creations and Marsupial. I got the second stage of the Sea to Summit tent review I got to get out. I've had 2 major projects at work back to back that have just been all consuming. I've been up at 4:30 in the morning every single day for the last month, which I'm not complaining about. It's great. Money's good. And it's going to basically fund the rest of the stuff that I'm doing for the rest of the winter. But I haven't had that much time to clean up all the odds and ends of the hunting season. I've got a Seek Outside 12-man teepee review that I'm trying to put up. And most of this stuff has been shot, or at least the notes have been written. And so my final delivery for my second project is Monday between 10 to 12. When that is done, my calendar is like wide open for the next month. Now I say that 99% of the time, the phone is going to ring 2 days later and somebody's going to want some work done. And I'll say yes, because I need to pay the bills and, you know, I'll have to make some compromises. But as far as it stands right now, as of next week, you're going to see a shitload of content flying out of the Mindful Hunter Studios because it's all backed up and ready to go. And I think as hunting season is winding down, this is kind of the perfect time to get that stuff out because people are eager for content. So I will be posting the final, second stage review on that Sea to Summit Telos. But basically, here's what happened. They were pretty good guys to deal with. I dealt with one guy named Barry the whole way through, and basically after explaining what went wrong with the tent and after sending him the video, he asked me to send it in. So I originally was going to say send the fly in, but then on second thought, he's like, you know what, just send the whole thing in. So I sent the whole thing in. Now they're supposed to have a suitor tester, or they do have a suitor tester. A suitor tester is a machine that basically tests the pressure per square inch required to force water through fabric. And so this is a very technical way of testing the waterproof capabilities of the actual fabric. I have some issues because it doesn't really address the real world construction of the tent itself, but there's always secondary ways to do that. So they were going to test it with the suitor machine. I was excited for that. Unfortunately, the machine was broken, and then it was supposed to be replaced, and then they got something shipped to them. It wasn't the suitor machine. So he said, listen, we're just going to set the thing up and spray it with water and see if we can replicate what happened for you. They set it up. They sprayed it with water. They were unable to replicate what happened. They did say that up near the top of one of the vents, near one of the zippers, there was a small amount of water entering the tent, but nothing in line with what I had experienced. But they said, listen, clearly you had an issue. We're going to replace the tent anyways. I thought that was really stand up. So they have shipped me a new tent. I've been thinking about it a lot. I can't find one other person that had a similar issue. And one of the things with this tent is that the condensation vent is right at the top of the tent. And there's basically this overhang with these 2 rods that keep this space kind of propped up and covered. Almost looks like a little awning right on top of the tent. And underneath that, there's a semicircle zipper. And when you open it, it opens like half a circle. There's no mesh, there's no nothing. And there might be mesh actually. But either way, at that point, water could just flow freely if it got underneath that awning. Now, here's the thing, and I like to be as transparent as possible. I cannot say with 100% certainty that that zipper was perfectly closed. In hindsight, it was the first night I'd set the tent up. Is it possible that zipper was open like a half an inch to an inch? It's totally possible. Now, if that was the case, because the wind was coming so sideways that night, like it was a wild night, rain 100% would have blown in under that little mini awning. It could have come in through that condensation vent and then traveled across the roof of the tent. You know how beads of water, condensation kind of just will run along a surface before it gets too big and then it will fall off. So that, I'm just saying, because they weren't able to replicate the issue, and I do trust that they tried, and because I haven't heard of anybody else having this issue, could it have been something to do with how I set up the tent? I think it's totally possible. And that was the reason why I kept my comments kind of conservative. And, you know, now that I've been doing reviews for longer, I used to be very like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, very emotive. If I found something wrong, I was like, I got, you guys suck, and you know, you shouldn't be selling. And, you know, after you do that so many times and then you find out, or the brand reaches out and you realize there's a perfectly logical explanation for the thing that you thought was broken, you feel like an idiot. And you really have to be careful. Like, these brands work very hard. I truly believe the majority of companies, especially the smaller companies that are really focused on the higher end premium gear, I really do believe they're trying to make the best gear that they can. Now, shit happens in manufacturing, and I think everybody deserves some consideration for that. But I do believe they're trying to make the best gear. So when I think I've found something that is broken or doesn't work right, I try and be really conservative with how I share it, because I want to leave room for the possibility that I've made a mistake in my, you know, testing or review process. So with that being said, I kind of kept my comments pretty minimal, but it was very disappointing. So here's the deal. This is a very long story. I have the tent. I'm going to set the tent up next week. I'm going to make sure with 100% certainty that everything is optimal. Tent is flat. Tent isn't too tight. All zippers are closed. And I'm going to do a waterproofing test. I'm actually going to lay a bunch of paper towel out on the bottom so I can see any moisture at all. And I'm going to run the sprinklers for an hour, kind of from all potential sides, and really kind of beat the shit out of it. And then we'll see. So I'm hoping, you know, film that next week, edit it next weekend, probably be up the week after that. So that's where we're at with the Sea to Summit Telos TR2. Now, one thing I'm curious about is, for my goat hunt, last 2 years ago, I ran the Hilleberg solo. I'm wondering if people would like to see me test something different this time around. I'm specifically thinking of the new Stone Glacier Solus. They've got a one-person winter tent, four-season tent, that I've heard really mixed reviews on. Some people seem to love it. Some people think there's some like really weird decisions made on it. But maybe let me know if that's something that you want me to try and put my hands on and review. All right, I think that's it for the tent warranty question. Yeah, stay tuned. I'll have that final wrap-up video up in a couple weeks. Badlands Hunter says, base layer for a guy who sweats a ton. Merino makes me cold. Synthetics get funky. My honest answer to this is like, who cares that it gets funky? I mean, it's hunting. There is no perfect option. And after running Merino for multiple years and synthetics for multiple years, when I compare the pros and cons of each, I now land on synthetic. I used to land on Merino, and if you're listening to this and you land on Merino, I don't blame you, especially with a lot of the newer Merino blends that have some synthetics in them. I think, you know, there's really strong arguments to like Merino over synthetics, especially for base layers. But for my body type and the way I hunt and kind of my overall moisture management system, I prefer synthetics. One option would be to take a second base layer for halfway through your hunt. I find the real funk doesn't set in until day 3 or 4. Something very interesting as well, and I forget the actual mechanism behind this, but you smell like this when you get into ketosis. If you've ever had that ammonia smell, it tends to come from glucogenesis. So what happens when you're out of carbs? Now, protein is still a source of energy, and you can break down protein in a way where you get energy from it. It's extremely inefficient, but you can do it oxidatively where you can do it in an anaerobic environment without oxidation. So I don't want to get into like a big nutrition seminar here, but some form of energy metabolism requires oxygen and some forms don't. And when you're in a really high output exercise mode, you tend to need anaerobic energy metabolism. So that's primarily carbs, and you can metabolize carbohydrates without the presence of oxygen. It doesn't mean you're not breathing. It means that there's no actual oxygen present as the carbohydrates get broken down into their constituent elements, and it can be done very efficiently. Now, the most efficient form of energy production we have is fatty acid oxidization. It requires the least amount of energy, and it gives us the greatest amount of energy. However, it takes the longest amount of time, and oxygen is required. But if you're going on an incredibly long walk or like a moderately challenging hike, these are activities where you're going to be fatty acid oxidization. But when you're doing things like, a weight resistance exercise or a really intense hike up a hill, anything where your heart rate really starts to get elevated and you're gasping for breath, you start to require anaerobic forms of energy production. Now, when you run out of carbohydrates, one of the secondary forms you can jump to is called glucogenesis. Well, there's something to do with like some type of ammonia byproduct or at least something that smells like an ammonia. And I notice when I start to get really deep into a hunt, the scent of my sweat changes to this it's like a sickly smell, and it's like ammonia. It's like acidic, like it's bitter, like it kind of burns your nose hairs, and you're like, fuck, that is just brutal. And that comes from when you're pushing really hard and really deep. Like normally this happens on day 7, day 8. I've been on like 3,200 calories a day for the majority of the hunt. I'm starting to do really, really big hikes because I'm getting stressed. Something's not going to go down. And that kind of funk, I don't care if you're wearing merino. I don't care if you're wearing a Superman costume. It doesn't matter what's going on. You are going to stink. And it's going to be a very bitter, acrid scent. Nothing you can do about it. Now back to the original question. As far as like normal sweat funk goes, I'd say who cares? You could bring a backup base layer. It's really not that big. It'd be about the only piece of clothing I would bring a backup of, except for socks and underwear. I do like switching my 10-day hunt. I like switching my socks and underwear on day 5. The other thing you can do is like wash your shirt. Find a creek, wash a shirt, hang it up to dry. Not a great option on a winter hunt, but for the rest of the hunts, totally doable. I've done it on my sheep hunt. It's fantastic. You get the tricky part is getting to a spot where you're going to have water and sunshine at the same time, because normally you're down in these like really wet creeks. But you could wear your second base layer for a little while you let the first one dry. It's not like by second base layer, I mean you're heavier, like a heavyweight hoodie or an ambient hoodie. But I would say do something like bring a second one or wash it halfway through to manage the funk, but just go with synthetics, especially if you sweat a ton, because that merino is just going to stay wet the entire time. Now, I got a ton of questions about TRT and PEDs on this one. I don't know if it's the time of year. I don't know. Maybe I talk about drugs too much. Anyways, I don't care. I think it's funny. But I'm going to, instead of answering every single one, I'll kind of do a chat on the PED topic and then add context where required as we get to each one of these. And I won't share the names of who asked these just because who knows, maybe they don't want it shared. So the first question says, TRT, is it worth it? I can't answer that for you. Here are some things you should keep in mind if you're considering getting on TRT. One, for most guys, I'm talking to you guys in your late 30s and your early 40s. If you decide to do a cycle, or if you decide to go on TRT and you're thinking for just a short period of time, you are likely going to be on TRT for the rest of your life. The way that your endocrine system works, when you're younger, 20s, and you do a couple cycles, let's say less than 3 cycles, let's say 2 cycles. And if you're to do PCT, post-cycle therapy, which is typically like a combination of Nolvadex and Clomid and HCG that you would use to restart your endocrine system, I believe you could successfully do a couple cycles, do a couple PCTs, and your endocrine system is going to wind up basically back where you started, and you'll probably just fine. When you're in your 40s, that's not the way shit works. Once you take exogenous, by exogenous, I mean anything that's coming from outside the body, and endogenous being anything that comes from inside the body. Once you take exogenous testosterone, your endogenous testosterone production shuts down. And when you're in your 40s and you do that shit for any more than a few weeks, the bottom line is there is a strong likelihood that you will never get back your natural production of testosterone. And here's the thing. If you have subpar levels of testosterone already, you don't have any forgiveness. You've got nowhere to go. So even if you come back at 80% of what you were before, you're still in a really bad spot. So if you're considering doing a cycle or TRT and you're 40 plus, the question you should be asking yourself is not, do I want to do a cycle or do I want to go on TRT for 6 months? The question you should be asking yourself is, am I willing to go on TRT for the rest of my life? Because there's a high probability that that is what you're really going to end up doing. Now, that was one of the reasons why I never touched gear until I was in my late 30s, because I knew enough about it that I didn't want to have to deal with PCT and I didn't want to have to deal with my endocrine system shutting down. And once I hit my late 30s and got my testosterone levels back and decided to go on TRT, I knew for the way I like to live, the way I like to feel, the things I like to do, I was willing to go on TRT for the rest of my life. And I was grateful. I was like, well, shit, this makes it easy, because if I'm going to be on TRT for the rest of my life, then I can do a cycle here or there for bodybuilding purposes and then just bridge the cycles on my TRT dose. And it's actually much, much healthier. There's a lot of really strong arguments coming out that the kind of old school blast and cruise method is actually much better for your body and for your health than coming off of gear every time. Having your testosterone levels plummet and your estrogen levels plummet in between cycles because you think you're clearing out or refreshing receptors, whatever this bro science nonsense is, you're actually doing a lot of damage to your body and you're creating a very stressful environment, and you're also losing a lot of gains. Here's the other thing I would say to the guys in their 40s. If you're thinking of doing one cycle, I would say, why? You know, maybe you'll gain a couple of pounds of lean tissue. You're most likely going to lose it when you come off the sauce because you don't have optimal testosterone production anyways. And you need a fairly high level of testosterone to kind of keep that lean mass, especially if it's outside of where your body normally likes to sit. So say to yourself, am I willing to pin myself in the ass at least once a week with a syringe full of testosterone for the rest of my life? And if the answer to that question is yes, then start doing research about getting on TRT. If the answer to that question is no, then just move on. I would say the types of things that you need to be looking at to help you answer that question come down to quality of life. Do you find yourself getting really tired? Do you find your libido lacking? Do you find your natural sense of drive or competition is not what it used to be? Do you find yourself moody? Could be, bouts of depression or just overwhelming sadness from time to time. Do you find yourself getting really cranky with your kids or your wife? Now, a lot of this stuff you could say yes to, and it's just a normal day of the week. But try and look at trends. Like, can you look back over the last year and say, like, I just didn't feel like myself compared to previous years? Then is probably the time. Like when I decided to hop on, I was 37 years old. I just started my MBA. We just moved houses. My daughter was just born, and I was the general manager of an engineering firm, literally waking up at 4 a.m. every single day to do my MBA work until 7 a.m. And then I would take my kid to daycare, go to work for the day, still training and competing in jiu-jitsu. Like, it was insanity. And I just felt like a bag of shit. And I was getting enough sleep. I was getting enough food, but my And then I went in and had my testosterone level checked, and it was like 200. And the scale ideally is like from 4 to 900. And I was just like, this is not good enough. I don't want to live like this. And I don't want to do a million little dietary changes and herbal supplements and maybe get that 200 to 300. No, if the scale's 400, 900, I want to be 1,000. Like, screw it. Like, why not? You know what I mean? And obviously, if testosterone gets too high, there's a whole bunch of other complications. But for me, that quality of life was more important than the mild inconvenience of, jabbing some gear in your ass once a week. It's more often than that once you start doing legitimate cycles. But if you wanted to do like 120 milligrams per week for like an average TRT dose, they say you should break it up into smaller doses, but I've been doing this shit for a long time now, and I'm telling you, once a week is just fine for those smaller TRT doses, and you don't need any type of aromatase inhibitor or anything else with levels that low. It's pretty harmless. The other thing I would recommend, unless you are a super analytical and research-driven person, go see a doctor. If you want my guy, send me a DM. He's in Vancouver. I'll give you his information. He's super cool, very straight up. It's private. He's not an MD. He's a naturopath. But it's not like you're going to have to go and fake test results and like make up symptoms. You just walk in and say, listen, man, I'm in my 40s and this is bullshit. I want some TRT. And he'll be like, okay, let's go. He's going to make you do some blood work and some other shit because legally you have to and ethically you should. But there's not going to be any games. And that's what I was sick of. And if you do want to use underground gear, just make sure you know what you're doing and you have a way to get your blood work done, because we don't in Canada. You cannot just walk into a lab and say, I want to test X, Y, and Z. You have to go convince an MD that you should be able to have these tests. And some of these guys are dicks to deal with. So for me, TRT is 100% worth it. Is that the case for everybody? Probably not. All right, Will CR97 says, aero builds and bino harnesses have taken up all my Google time lately. So I just did an entire podcast on my aero build, so I'm not going to get into that. And I should have a review of the Marsupial versus AGC bino harnesses up next week, so I'm not going to touch on that. But I think those are both topics worthy of Google searches, my friend. Dome92 says, how much training do you put in with your bow and rifle? Rifle, SFA, sweet fuck all. Bow, lots. And this is, we can talk about the whole archery versus, rifle conversation later on. But this is one of the things I refer to archery as a perishable skill. Some skills, once you got it, you got it, Other skills need to be worked on or they fade away. And that's what I call a perishable skill. I didn't come up with the word, but it's referred to as a perishable skill. So I try and shoot my bow when I'm in an off season and I don't have a bow hunt for at least the next 6 months. I don't shoot my bow. But once I have a bow hunt on the horizon, like I'm going to have a bow hunt, most likely in August, I will start practicing pretty religiously 6 months out at least 3 times a week, ideally 5 times a week. I think it's the same as working out. I don't think you actually start to see progress until you're doing something 5 days a week. And I have found much greater effect with shorter, more frequent training sessions with my archery equipment. Like, I'd rather go out 5 times a week for 20 minutes a day than 3 times a week for an hour a day. I just find my skill improves quicker with the greater frequency. Plus, we're hunters, not target archers. So being able to shoot 100 consistent arrows doesn't mean anything. Being able to walk up and shoot one perfect arrow with 0 practice means everything. So I'd rather replicate that situation more frequently than the other situation. So yeah, now as far as a rifle goes, I don't know what to say, man. I never shoot my gun, ever. And I just went to the range a couple months ago, set my gear up, smacked a 4-inch steel plate at 400 yards. Done. Wasn't even hard at all. And it's kind of like, I do think if you're going to be shooting longer distances, or I'm not advocating not practicing with your rifle, but I'm also for like a sub 400 yard shot, which is I've never taken a shot over 300. So it's not the type of hunting I do. For a sub 400 yard shot, if you've been taught at least once how to shoot a gun and you've done some practice at some point in your life, it's not a difficult thing to do. I think practicing on some different angles and whatnot is good, but yeah, I'm just my own experience. It's not hard to shoot a gun. The other stuff surrounding it might be difficult, but the shooting of the gun itself is not a difficult thing to do. So no, if I'm being completely transparent, I do not practice shooting my gun very much. I'd like to do it more because it's fun to go out and drop some rounds, but I live downtown Vancouver. It's like a 2-hour drive to get anywhere even close to something cool that I could shoot at. So yeah, that's where I'm at. That's the honest answer. Best PED to start with. The answer is testosterone. So testosterone is bioidentical to your own testosterone. It's what your body is used to seeing. Testosterone needs to be present. So as a man, you make estrogen through the conversion of testosterone by an enzyme your liver creates called aromatase. So testosterone becomes present. If without exogenous testosterone, your body uses cholesterol. It creates testosterone through your testes. It enters into your system. The enzyme aromatase gets produced in your liver. It metabolizes with testosterone. Estrogen is then created. And these are your two primary hormones that drive a lot of your androgenic anabolic activities. And so it's required. Like you need both of those in order to feel fit and functional. Now, there are some steroids that do not metabolize into estrogen, but will still shut down your natural testosterone production. That can be dangerous because then you're not going to have estrogen present in your body. So testosterone is super safe like that. It is the most tested. You know, you got all these kids taking all these SARMs, and it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Like they've got studies where they're giving cancer to rats, and human trials have never even been entered into. And people think, well, they're not steroids, so they're safer. And it's like, you are a moron. You're using like a research chemical when you could be using a chemical that has had decades of research, millions of human use cases, and like zero negative side effects when done in a reasonable dose. So, I mean, for 99% of people, I don't think you need to experiment with any other PED besides testosterone. Now, when we start talking super physiological doses, like when you start wanting to do things like, you know, have an edge in competitive sports or build an exorbitant amount of lean tissue or do something that's out of the range of what we'll call like normal physiological function, then I think it's wise to start throwing some other things in, and we can have a conversation about what those other things might be based on your goals, your blood work, and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's wise, for example, to do, 1,500 milligrams a week of testosterone. I think you'd be much better off to do something like, 400 milligrams a week of testosterone and 1,000 milligrams a week of masterone. For example, I'm not telling you to go do that. I'm just saying that in my opinion, the second prescription would have less side effects than the first prescription. So yeah, best PED to start with, testosterone. Rocky Mountain Wolf asks, are saddle stands useful? I can't answer this question for personal experience, but I hope to by next year. So I did that whitetail hunt in Alberta. I loved being in the stand. I didn't like how high those particular ones were. But I like the challenge of trying to sit there all day. I like the solitude. I like the quiet. I like that when there are animals underneath you, it's super cool, man. So that being said, I am going to buy a saddle rig and start experimenting with it next spring. I got a couple areas where I want to start running some cams for deer, and I hope to kind of find a couple areas where I think I could have some success with a stand, and then maybe even like buy a couple and do a bit of a head-to-head review. First, I got to go look at all the content that's already out there from other guys who have more experience than I do with this. I think the answer to the question is 100% saddle stands are useful. I think if you're doing any type of run and gun stand operation, I think a saddle is going to be more effective than a lightweight like a Lone Wolf or something tree stand. I think it's going to be quieter. I think it's going to be lighter. I'm sure there's drawbacks, but because I haven't experimented with them myself, I don't know what they are. Vance Johnson asks, seen you use the Kifaru gun bearer. How is it? Is it awkward going through thick brush? Have you tried alternatives? I love the Kifaru gun bearer. It is probably my favorite way to carry a gun in the field, unless I'm in a situation where I'm nowhere near game, or I've already been successful, I'm tagged out and I can't shoot anything else anyways, and then I can strap it to the back of my pack. Although strapping it to the back of the pack does create like a really weird weight balance with some packs. And so the Kifaru gun bearer, it's basically this, it's like a webbed pocket that attaches to the hip belt of your backpack. And then the gun barrel kind of comes up in front of your shoulder and to the right of your face if you're a right-handed person. And then there's a piece of strap webbing that you connect to your shoulder strap. And then when you want to shoot, you just unclick this strap, lift and shoot. It's a really great setup. I love it. It's probably the least annoying in thick brush because having something on the side or the back of your backpack, the barrel's always grabbing stuff. With it in front of you, you can see where the barrel is. So you can like move your barrel around stuff. You know how far you've got to bend down. I think it's a really great system. Now, the only drawback is it does affect the mechanics of your backpack. By placing that extra weight kind of pulling directly down on the hip belt, it does, especially after like longer hunts, it creates an asymmetry in the load distribution of the pack that's not ideal, and it starts carrying kind of wonky on you. But compared to all the other options out there, it's my favorite way of carrying a rifle. Now, one guy asks, PEDs, how much squeeze for competition? I'm going to assume he means how much gear, like what types of doses are people taking. I'm not going to get into specific recommendations because I'm not an expert in this field and I'm not going to give medical advice, and I'm not going to be responsible for some cycle some idiot puts together because he thought that's what I told him to do. But we can have a broad conversation about the amounts of gear people tend to run, or the spectrum within which people tend to run cycles. I would say on average, a real TRT from a doctor, just to like, let's start at the lower end and work up, is between 120 and 150 milligrams per week. Now, I've seen some doctors' prescriptions that are as low as 50 or 80. I think that's ridiculous, but I'm not a doctor. And I've seen some prescriptions, mine included, that go as high as 320. I think that's insane. I don't think that's required for TRT at all. But, I mean, I didn't say no. So mine is a spectrum. Like, I can go from one dose to another dose. And, you know, he just wanted to make sure that when they prescribed me the actual testosterone, I would get enough for what I wanted. But so let's just say an average real TRT is between 100 or 150. Now, there's all these new like sports TRT terms coming out, or TRT plus, and they would be in the neighborhood of like 250 milligrams per week. The thing with TRT is that you should not need to take any type of aromatase inhibitor, right? So an aromatase inhibitor like Arimidex or Aromacin will stop and they work on two different mechanisms, but for our purposes, just know that they block the ability of that enzyme aromatase to break down testosterone into estrogen. And so part of the problem with a super physiological dose of testosterone is that you then get a super physiological dose of estrogen. And if that happens, you get all kinds of weird side effects that none of us want, like gynecomastia, oily skin, acne, all the bad stuff. Most of that stuff comes from high estrogen, not high testosterone. So when your testosterone gets really high, if you don't use some kind of mechanism, your estrogen will get really high too. Now, you can use other steroids to combat that without using an aromatase inhibitor. And I would say modern cycle design is more designed around using a DHT alternative. So I'm not going to get into the steroid family tree, but there's one group of steroids called DHTs. And this is like Masterone, Primobolan, Winstrol, and these do not aromatize. And some of them, like Masteron and Primobolan, actually inhibit through different mechanisms aromatase production, or they just get in the way of that whole cycle. So you can actually combat high estrogen by just adding a different PED. Aromatase inhibitors can be really bad on your lipids, your cholesterol, your HDL, and your LDL. And that's really important because that creates plaque in your arteries. You could have a jammer, you could have all kinds of stuff. So these are the types of things you need to work out and look at if you're going to start running really big cycles. Anyways, when I start saying these doses, just recognize that when I'm going to say like an average first cycle for somebody is probably around 500 milligrams. Now that 500 milligrams could just be 500 milligrams a week of test, or maybe they're throwing a little bit of D-ball in there, 20 milligrams, 5 days a week. There's 100 milligrams. So maybe they're doing 400 milligrams of test and 100 milligrams of D-ball. Maybe they're doing 250 milligrams of test and 250 grams of Masterone. But let's just say when I say a total use is 500 milligrams, that is the combination of all of the anabolics that they're currently on. So for most people, that first cycle, and lots of people are going to see gains at even like 300-400 milligrams, but the classic recommendation has always been 500 milligrams. Whether or not that's required, I'm not going to get into. Now, when we start getting into like competition level cycles, I would say that on average, like an off-season cycle, probably around 1,000 milligrams, maybe as high as 1,500 milligrams, like 1 gram to 1.5 grams a week of gear is I think what you're going to see. Even most pros, people think pros take obscene amounts of gear. And the funny thing is the guys with the best genetics need the least amount of gear. It's the guys in the amateur ranks who can't accept the reality of the situation and the limits that their genetics present that are taking way too much gear. So let's say an average off-season cycle is somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams, 1 gram to 1.5 grams a week of gear. Your competition cycle, because you're putting in a lot more orals and a lot more other stuff, and again, this is all up for debate, what you take. And an average competition cycle is going to look something like testosterone and Masterone is your base, and then some tren, the last 6 to 10 weeks, depending on where you're at and what you want to look like. And probably some Winstrol, maybe some Halo, maybe some Anavar, definitely not all three, but maybe 1 or 2 of the above, something that's not going to create water retention. That's the other thing about DHT derivatives is that they don't create water retention, whereas like nandrolones, which is like DECA, NPP, Trenbolone is a little bit different, even though it is in the nandrolone category. They do create water retention. And that's why like the old classic bulking cycle of test, DECA, and D-ball, yeah, you blow up like a fucking moonfish, like you because you're retaining a shitload of water. Everybody's like, oh, I put on 20 pounds in 3 weeks. And it's like, yeah, you're retaining 18 pounds of water. Whereas with the DHT derivatives, you don't retain that water. But anyways, that was what an average competition cycle would look like. Your testosterone base, a couple of DHT derivatives in liquid and injectable and oral form, and then probably some tren, because that's going to be the thing that kind of like drives you over the edge and gets you that like kind of gnarly, grainy look, and it helps with carbohydrate partitioning. It's something that only Tren is able to do, but it's kind of an interesting way that it metabolizes, helps you metabolize carbohydrates. And I would say that on average, and again, I do know pros and I do know cycles, so this isn't complete out of my ass, probably around 2 grams a week for that last 12 weeks of prep, if you included all the injectables and all the orals that they're taking. I'm sure there's going to be guys on less, and I'm sure there's going to be guys on more, but let's just say ballpark. Regular TRT, 100, 150 milligrams a week. TRT plus, 250 a week. First cycle, 500 a week. An intermediate, kind of somebody who wants to compete in the off season, maybe 1 gram to 1.5 grams a week. And competition, probably closer to 2 grams a week. Now, when you start doing big cycles like 1.5 grams a week and 2 grams a week, you're getting into really, tricky, potentially dangerous territory. So this is where you need to be working with a professional coach, doing blood work on a regular basis, and really monitoring things and taking lots of breaks in between and going down to TRT, getting your lipids back in check. I check my blood pressure every week. I check my blood glucose every week. You should be going in and getting an ECG, lots of stuff you should be doing. So that's what I would say your average kind of doses look like. So if that was what you were asking, then there you go. Okay, Brian Clark asked, creatine, how much, how often, brands and types? Thanks. I would say for most adult men, 10 grams a day. You could get away with 5 grams, but why? Creatine is dirt cheap. 10 grams a day, creatine monohydrate, the cheapest shit you can find. Buy it in like 1 kilogram tubs. I don't care what no-name bullshit it is on whatever supplement website you found. 10 years ago, it really mattered. You wanted to make sure it was CreaPure because that was really the only German facility that was creating like high-end micronized creatine. It is such a commodity now. I don't think you could find shitty creatine if you tried. It'd be like trying to find shitty acetaminophen. Like, it just doesn't exist. Like, it is so widely used and so cheaply produced. Where they bend you over with creatine is with all the marketing hype. Like, all the weird forms of creatine that they're coming out with and the blends, and they're mixing it with that. Just stop that nonsense. You want old school creatine monohydrate, big ass tub, 10 grams a day. Super simple. Getting into filming and content creation. What's the first thing to prioritize, a GoPro or a mirrorless? That's a great question. I'm going to say the GoPro. If you look back at my goat hunting film called Maximum Effort that I shot in 2020, 99% of that film, there's literally like 2 scenes in that whole film that are shot with a mirrorless camera. Everything else is shot with GoPro, and you would never know. If you really get to know your GoPro, like learn how to shoot flat. If you don't know what that means, Google it. Learn how to use LUTs, lookup tables in your editing software platform, your DAW. You can get a very filmic look with high-end action cameras, especially the more recent iterations that GoPro has come out with. Now, you're not going to get that like super, cinematographic bokeh in the background, really shallow depth of field without a mirrorless. So I definitely think that it's something that you should save up for. But if you're on a budget, get the best GoPro you can afford first. Then what I would do is think about the first piece of glass you want. I would recommend for somebody who's going to, this is more for solo filming. I love a 24 to 70 mil lens, okay? Don't be afraid of used glass. Buy really, really good glass and buy an okay body. You don't have to buy a full frame camera. Like, you could get away with like a Sony 6400 or something at first, because as long as it's E-mount, it's going to fit your lenses. So when you want to upgrade, you can upgrade your body and your lenses stay with it. So I say prioritize money into glass body is secondary because you can always upgrade the body later. Harry asks, ever dealt with knee pain from long days in the hills? And if so, found any exercises that helped? I've dealt with lots of knee pain, and I have a torn meniscus. I went in for an MRI at the beginning of my bodybuilding prep last year, and turns out I have a radial non-displaced tear in the meniscus of my left knee. And I just fought my way through it, didn't have surgery, didn't do anything. The thing that I have found most helpful for me is finding foot placement on leg exercises that allow me to go through the full range of motion in the leg exercise with zero knee pain. And when I say zero, I mean zero. Because I found, so this does two things. One, if you're doing it wrong or wrong for your anatomy, you're going to exacerbate the knee problem, or that could be where the knee problem comes from in the first place. And if you're not doing exercise, if you're only doing the hiking, you're not doing anything to like strengthen up all the kind of connective tissues and the supporting muscle groups. So this is a recommendation whether you lift or don't lift. You need to start lifting. But for me, I find things like a pendulum squat and a hack squat where my toes are pretty severely angled out at like 30 degrees, like a duck foot stance. My knees tend to track to the outside. And I used to do all my leg movements with my feet parallel, and that would force my knees to track along a path that they didn't want to track. And that's where all the pain came from. But when I twist my feet out at a 30-degree angle, go slightly wider than shoulder width and maybe out a little bit, and go very slow through the eccentric plane of movement. So when I'm coming down, I'm not going like a crazy slow, but I'm controlled. I used to bounce out of the hole. You do it when you squat, you do it when you do lots of leg exercises, and it helps you push more weight. And if you're young and you got strong tendons and joints, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. But I found this and I do think there's studies that back me up on this. I don't have them at my fingertips. But I think what I read was that connective tissue, like your tendons and your ligaments, tend to be strengthened through eccentric movement, not concentric movement. And so really controlling the negative on the way down, hitting that bottom, you don't got to stop for a whole 1 count. But you don't instantly change direction either. You go down, you stop, you come up. And using weight that you can have that level of control with, I've noticed my knees have got to a whole new place. Like, it's wild, man. I don't do anything crazy like the knees over toes guy or David Gray, or I don't do any like really weird physiotherapy exercises. I went and saw a bunch of physiotherapists. I tried a bunch of shit. None of that like really did anything for me. I started pushing really heavy weight, something that I'm maxing out at like 6 to 8 reps with for the first set, and then I'll do a back off set with this really controlled movement and optimal foot placement. But experiment. Maybe it's a Smith squat for you with a really wide stance. Maybe it's a barbell squat with your heels elevated and your toes pointed out. Like, I don't know. Everybody has their own anatomy, but finding that path, that squatting or leg pressing path, that movement pattern that your legs can go through where you're experiencing zero pain, and then just starting to load the shit out of that. My knees are better now. I'm 44 years old, and my knees are better now than they have been in the last 10 years. And I really think it's because of how focused I've been on my leg development. Also, for the last 3 months, I switched to 2 leg days a week. It's not quite 2 leg days a week, but I do a push-pull legs program. So most weeks I'm doing legs twice a week, and I think that's really helped in my development as well. Broken Art Hunter says, beard grooming and maintenance tips. Yeah, I got a couple for you. Invest in a really nice boar bristle brush, like one of those wooden, they're 3-4 inches wide. They've got like, 2-inch bristles on them, and give your face a good scrubbing with it every morning. That's going to exfoliate. Most guys get like dry skin under their beards, and it's because there's no air getting in there. So give it a nice scrub in the morning before you get in the shower. When you get out of the shower, invest in either a really nice beard oil or beard balm and rub it in. Give your beard a little massage with it, and then give it a nice brushing with the boar bristle brush. And I've found, like, I'm really kind of impressed with the beard I have right now. I never thought I would have a beard like this, and I'm kind of having a really great time with it because I just think it's hilarious that I've got this, like, crazy mountain man beard thing going on. My kid thinks it's hilarious. Anyways, and I don't think it would kind of have that cool, like, I don't even know what some of the famous beard guys are, but you know what I mean. Like, it looks like an Instagram ad beard. I don't think you get that without some care and maintenance. Also, find a good barber. I get my beard shaped every 2 weeks. I go in and I get a haircut every 2 weeks, and he does my hair and he does my beard. And he doesn't end up taking off a whole lot, but he kind of he steams it with a towel and he does a bunch of fruity shit. And then he goes through and he trims it. And he has a shape that he's going for, kind of like the jaw forward, thinner on the sides look. And he shapes it every 2 weeks. And it's a lot easier to keep a long beard when it looks good. I think if I had some big raggedy ass thing on my face, I would have shaved it a long time ago. All right. Eric asks, what are the essential supplements to take to build muscle? There are none. If you have a balanced diet and you are getting enough protein, you don't need anything. That being said, most people would find a protein supplement beneficial. I'm in that gram to gram and a half per pound of body weight camp. So if you're 200 pounds, I think 300 pounds of protein. If you're 200 pounds, I think 300 grams of protein is a good goal to shoot for. That's hard to hit for most people with just whole foods. So being able to have a shake or two a day, I think really helps. We talked about creatine before. I think I would throw that in there as well. And I think if you were just like a natty guy and wanted to put on some weight, I think buying some protein and buying some creatine is probably all you need to do. I think things that I would look at next would be fish oil. That would be really good for your joints. A lot of people like glutamine, but I don't know. I've done it a bunch, and I don't think it does shit. Branched chain amino acids or essential amino acids would be something else that I would put in that secondary category. And then I think the thing that is probably somewhat controversial, whether you need it or not, but it would be a pre-workout. Simply because if you're able to elevate the intensity of your workouts and the quality of your workouts, then everything else you're doing, you're going to get that much more benefit from. But I'd say really for an average dude, protein and creatine and have a coffee before you go train is probably all you need. All right. S. Denka says, I like the mental toughness stuff. Day 5, cold, tired, alone, no game. Are you quitting? Fuck no, I'm not quitting. And I'm not quitting because you've seen my videos and I don't quit. And I'm very good at going 5 days without seeing any game at all. I do it all the time. This is something I'd like some feedback on. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. I saw this quote, or I heard somebody make a comment that no matter who you are, the hardest thing you've ever done in your life is the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. And human beings judge by relativity. We need context in order to understand our situations. So when we think something is difficult, we only know that it's difficult by relating it or comparing it to other situations we've had that have been difficult. So if all of the situations in your life have not been very difficult, then when you hit something that is somewhat difficult, it seems really difficult because it's so much more challenging than anything else you've ever done. Now, if you've gone through things in life that are incredibly challenging and difficult, Then when you get to the same activity that somebody else found super hard, it's like, I mean, is it really? Nah, it's not. Because you're looking back on these things that were like life-threateningly difficult. And so I've always thought about life by, if I can make that hardest thing I've ever endured like harder and harder and harder to the point where it's just ludicrous, then everything else I go through in life just seems pale by comparison. I don't think I've ever really talked about this on the podcast, which I find odd because everyone in my life knows this about me. I'm sober, okay? I haven't drank in 14 years. I haven't drank or done drugs in 14 years. I was a hardcore junkie for well over a decade of my life. I'm talking like full-blown heroin, cocaine, started injecting heroin when I was 15 years old. Like, should probably write a book about all the dumb shit I've ever done in my life. So I've had to get sober twice in my life from intravenous drugs. I got sober when I was 23 and I stayed sober for 4 years until I was 27. And then I went back out because I had to relearn some lessons. I got sober again when I was 30 and I've been sober ever since. And I'm interested to know if people like want a whole podcast about this. I could tell the whole story. I don't give a shit. I don't have any shame about any of it. I was part of a 12-step program for a really long time. I've done my work. I'm good. If people think it would be interesting or helpful, I'll do a whole podcast on it. I think it's one of the missing pieces. I think a lot of people ask me, like, I don't understand how you do what you do as far as like the solo hunts or even like working a full-time job, doing Mindful Hunter, doing all this other shit. And the bottom line is because none of this is fucking difficult at all. Like, once you've died a couple times and come back to life and, been a statistic and then gotten sober and like had to go through that twice in your life, I'm telling you right now, doing a 10-day solo sheep hunt is a walk in the park. It doesn't even register on the scale of difficulty compared to some of the other things. And I'm not even like, even some of the shit that I had to go through in my childhood, like some of that stuff was so insanely difficult compared to the stuff that I go through now. And the stuff I go through now is voluntary, that it's challenging, but not really, not like that other stuff was. And so that's where I think, do you really want to build mental toughness? Like, do you want to be someone that just does not quit ever? You want to be like that Goggins, Haynes, psycho motherfucker? You have to drive yourself through whatever means possible to endure just harder and harder and harder things, because everything in your life is going to appear easier after that, to the point of ludicrousness. To the point where you start doing things that used to seem impossible and you're not even breaking a sweat. So I don't want to like go off on this huge tangent about this, but I did have this kind of revelation that everything that you endure today is measured in difficulty by comparing it to the hardest thing you've ever done. So if that thing is not very hard, everything else is going to seem very hard. So go make that judgment marker, that milestone, that hardest thing you've ever done, go make that harder. Go dig deeper. Go find something even more dumb to go and do, because then you're going to open up a whole new realm of possibilities. Okay, this guy's just straight up trolling me now because of everything I've been talking about lately, but Lester Rock says, how much archery hunting is harder than rifle hunting? And I'm going to get myself in shit and I don't even care. It was funny. I was watching that little clip from the guy from Yellowstone who was on Jimmy Kimmel, and he literally just says, quote unquote, like, oh, archery hunting is much, much harder than rifle hunting. And I just laughed my ass off because I've been having all these side conversations with these kind of rifle guys who get really bent out of shape when you say archery hunting is harder than rifle hunting. And I'm sorry, but like, what kind of maniac or moron do you need to be where this is even a conversation? Like, is running harder than being on a bicycle? Like, yeah, if I ask you to go to 100, like, let's say if there's a 100-mile stretch of road and I say you got to get from A to B, same stretch of road. Is running that stretch of road more difficult than riding a bike on that stretch of road? 100%. There's no one who's going to tell you differently. Now, if it's two different stretches of road and there's different situations, then maybe the one stretch of road is easier to run than ride a bike on. I think where people get bent out of shape is when you just say, full stop, archery hunting is harder than rifle hunting. That's not true. There are lots of rifle hunts that are harder than archery hunts. But listen, there's a reason why that in a given unit, when wildlife managers want to reduce harvest numbers and increase opportunity, what do? They switch the tags from rifle to archery. Because what happens? Harvest numbers go down. Because in the same unit, with the same animals, killing something with a bow is much more difficult than killing it with a rifle. It's just logic. There's not even an argument to be had here. However, I do want to back up and say that doesn't mean you can just kind of draw a blanket over the whole topic and say that archery hunting full stop is harder than rifle hunting. It's not. There are lots of like really crazy rifle hunts that are more difficult. But also, just a side note, I don't know anybody who's killed a half a dozen animals or more with a bow who even engages in this conversation. It's mostly guys who've never gone bow hunting. So do me a favor, if this really kind of gets under your skin and this really pisses you off, go learn how to shoot a bow, because I went and learned how to shoot a rifle, even though I prefer to bow hunt. Go learn how to shoot a bow, go kill half a dozen animals with your bow, and then come back to me and have this conversation. And then we'll see, where your opinion lies. But I have nothing but respect for every single person who hunts. And I don't care. I'm not that guy that when you send me a picture of a deer, I'm going to say rifle or bow. I don't care how you killed it. If you're a hunter, you're cool in my books. If what you're doing is legal and in line with traditional methods of take, have at her. I'm here to support you. I got nothing but love. But, it's almost, it's the same thing as like the winter goat hunt versus a non-winter goat hunt. Like, yeah, the winter goat hunt is harder. In most cases, like if you're in the same unit with same circumstances, getting in there and killing that goat is going to be harder in the winter than not. There are obviously some exceptions. But like, why am I going on a winter goat hunt? Well, because I want to make it harder. And no, I haven't killed a goat. Why don't you go kill an easy goat? Because I don't want to kill an easy goat. I'm fine with not killing a goat until I kill a really hard goat. Same thing with like bigger, more mature animals. I saw smaller whitetail bucks I could have shot when I was in Alberta. I'm at the point in my hunting career, I see some of these pictures and like, listen, guys, if this is you and you're killing these little 2 points, this season was like full of them. If you're just a new hunter, I love and support you. Absolutely. Let's see your success. If you've been hunting for 5 years or more and you are out there like shooting little 2 points and putting pictures of them up on Instagram and like thinking that somehow makes you a great hunter, like, can you please just stop? If you want to go out on a meat hunt and your unit supports that kind of hunting, fine. But then don't post that as if it was some form of trophy because you took candy from a baby. You killed an idiotic, young, immature animal that doesn't have the experience to know how to evade you. You do not get congratulations from me for doing that. That was easy. Any idiot could do it. Where you set yourself apart is by doing things that average people can't do. That comes from either going places where other people can't, holding out for animals that other people won't, using weapons that other people aren't willing to train themselves in. Like, that's where the greatness lies. And if that's not why you hunt, then that's fine. I don't care. But for me, the way I hunt, I'm looking for that. I want that like special situation that's not average and not normal. Anyways, I get pretty fired up about this and probably said a whole bunch of shit I just shouldn't, but who gives a shit? Why hunt goat? The very next question. Why hunt goats in the snow and not earlier in the season? From Zach Johnson. Because it's harder. I mean, There's no other reason. That solo winter goat hunt is the hardest psychological and physical wilderness experience I've ever had in my life. I've done my fair share of solo backcountry hunts now with all kinds of different animals, from deer to elk to sheep. And without a doubt, that winter goat hunt was the hardest. I can't explain it to you. Like, the sense of desolation, I think it might be the quiet, actually. This is really weird. This is just coming to me now. Have you ever been in one of those underground parking lots where they have the spray foam all over the walls and it sounds weird in there? Like something's just not right. That's what winter goat hunting is like, especially in these really heavy snowfall areas, where most of the winter goat hunting takes place in British Columbia. That's where you're in, like crazy. You can get a 12 to 18 inch dump overnight, no problem. There's probably 7 or 8 feet of snow on the ground. Like, it's insanity. And when you're walking around, it sounds like one of those underground parking lots because everything is essentially covered in spray insulation. But the psychological challenge of being alone in that environment where it's like so bitter, so inhospitable, you're wet all the time, you can't start a fire, like, it is brutal. I can't get already, like, I am chomping at the bit. Like, if I could leave tomorrow for my winter goat hunt, I would. Like, there's something about that level of challenge. Like, I won't say I conquered it last time. Like, there are times when, like, I just didn't get out of the tent in the morning for half an hour, 45 minutes because I just couldn't muster the discipline. I was like, I don't want to go out there, man. I'm sick and tired of being cold and wet and alone. And I would eventually get out, and that didn't happen every day. But what I'm trying to say is there is 100% room for improvement in my mental integrity under those conditions. I survived it, but I didn't crush it. And it was like, I can't wait to test myself again. I've had 2 more years. I got a bunch more hunts under my belt. I got a bunch more familiarity with different pieces of gear. My mind is 2 years tougher. My body is 2 years tougher. Like, I can't wait to get in there and see what I'm made of. And I think, all of these things that we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, like the archery hunting versus the rifle hunting versus, like, there is the purpose of executing an act just to execute it. And then there's the purpose of doing something to see what you're made of, to test yourself. And I think some people like hunting to go hunting. And I fully appreciate and support that. Some people like hunting because it is an instrument to test yourself. And if you're using hunting as an instrument to test yourself, that's when all these other questions start becoming very interesting. What method of take do you want to employ? What time of year do you want to go? What gear do you want to allow yourself to take? Who are you bringing with you? Are you bringing anyone with you? Because if the purpose is just to hunt, these questions are not important. And these questions aren't interesting because you should be doing whatever is going to give you the highest likelihood of success because you're there for the hunt. However, if you're there to test yourself, then it's like the question then becomes, well, what situation or set of circumstances can I create that is the most difficult without being so difficult I fail? Because I could craft a hunt where I would come out. I could say, oh, you only get to take 2,000 calories a day, or you only get to take a summer sleeping bag. Like, I could just do things that were just stupid that would make it so difficult that I would fail. But the question is, how much help do you give yourself to get it to that perfect spot where it's right below where you're going to fail? Interesting side note. In psychology, there's this thing called the zone of proximal development. And when you look at childhood development, the optimal way to train or to educate a child in anything, whether it's like information transmission, skill development, knowledge transfer, is by creating tasks that fall within the zone of proximal development. So the zone of proximal development describes an area of difficulty that lies within what that child is capable of. So if you give a child a task that is too easy, they find it boring. If you give it, or they don't learn anything from it. If you give a child a task that is too hard, that there's no way they're ever going to do it, they also get bored, and after 2 seconds, they just give up because they see right away there's no way I can do this. So finding those tasks that are easy enough they can accomplish them, but hard enough that there's challenge is the sweet spot. And once you find that sweet spot and you keep hitting them with tasks in that sweet spot over and over and over again, that's where you get accelerated growth and development. And that's why I think it's one of the reasons I'm good at learning to do stuff, because I can find that area for myself very quickly, whether it be with physical training, mental training, any of that kind of stuff, a new skill I'm trying to learn. And so hunts are like that. Like if you're one of these test yourself guys, ask yourself, what's my zone of, and this is why guys hit me up who've never done a solo hunt. And they're like, I can't do a 10-day hunt. And it's like, no, you can't, because it's outside of your zone of proximal development. It's outside of that area that even under the best conditions, you would be successful within. And so don't set yourself up for failure, because that's only going to set you back. You got to set yourself up for success, but you got to do it at that upper limit of that zone. So you have to like figure out some stuff, go on some hikes, ask yourself some tough questions. Like, what's the toughest thing I can survive without failing that's still going to be tough enough where I'm going to develop, I'm going to grow, I'm going to learn. And so for me, that's one of the things that I use winter. Like winter is another variable or another lever I can pull that will increase the challenge of the hunt. We are waxing philosophical today, boys and girls. Holy shit. Listen, really inspired by all the questions that came in this week. I love doing this podcast. I mean, it is now 7 o'clock in the morning. I just talked for an hour and a half, and I woke up at 5 on a Saturday just so I could do this, because I love doing it. I love talking with you guys. I love the engagement. I love when I say dumb shit that I shouldn't say and people call me out on it. So please feel free to do that as well. As always, if you could engage with the platform in any way, shape, or form, like, comment, share, subscribe. If you're interested in participating in the review process, mindful-reviews.com. You want to get in touch with me personally, jay@mindfulhunter.com, Instagram, mindful_hunter. And as always, thanks for tuning in.